Good morning, Amy Sheldon. I represent Middlebury and I sit on House Commerce and Economic Development. Good morning, I'm Robin Shy, the other representative from Middlebury, and I sit on House Corrections and Institutions.
Terry Norris, I represent Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I serve on Agriculture and Forestry.
Good morning, Diane Lanfer. I live in Virgins. I represent Addison 3, which is Ferrisburg, Virgins, Panton, Waltham, and Addison, and I sit on House Appropriations Committee.
And I am Fred Baser. I'm from Bristol, and I sit on the Tax Committee, Ways and Means.
Okay, we don't currently have any senators here from the county, but
so I'll ask alphabetically, usually two. Warren White from Ferrisburg also represent Addison County, Virgins, and I'm on the Energy and Technology Committee.
thank you, Warren. Any other legislators?
I'm not going to repeat, but I do know that Senator Chris Bray is teaching a class this morning and wanted me, or to everybody to hear that he's sorry that he's not able to make it.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Okay, we're getting started with questions. We know that the House passed the budget this past week. So the first question.
Good morning. My name is Fran Putnam. We would like to report on a rally and march that was held in Middlebury for gun safety on Saturday. There were more than 550 people there, and we passed around a petition which we made copies of for each of our legislators. So I just wanted you to know that the town of the Addison County is behind gun safety.
So the petition reads, we are gathered on the green in Middlebury today, March 24th, 2018, to march for our lives, to send an urgent message to our government. Keep our children safe. Enough is enough. We support the students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in a united front asking for gun safety and common sense gun reform. We join with them in demanding 5 reform actions. 1, digitize gun records. 2, close the loophole in our background check law that allows dangerous people who shouldn't be allowed to purchase firearms to slip through the cracks and buy guns online or at gun shows. 3, reinstate the CDC research on gun violence. 4, pass a law to ban the sale of assault weapons. And 5, prohibit the sale of high-capacity magazines.
So basically, we would like a report from the legislators on where this legislation stands at this point.
Did you mention that I think we have over 350 signatures on here just from passing it around at the rally?
Okay, is there a legislator that would like to answer that question?
I will do my best. And I also, for those in Middlebury, I put something out on Front Porch Forum. It was late last night, so it'll probably be out there on Front Porch Forum today with phone numbers and bill numbers and all of that. So the House passed in its second reading S55 on Friday night. It does 4 things. It closes the loopholes on universal background checks. It raises the age to purchase a gun to 21 with certain exceptions. It bans bump stocks, and it limits the number of magazine rounds to 10. It is going to go to final reading, third and final reading tomorrow, Tuesday, on the floor of the House. I think that there will be a couple more. I've seen at least one amendment. There may be more. But final vote will be tomorrow. The Senate and the House then have to concur. They both have to agree on the final bill, and then it will go to the governor for his signature. And so that is S55. That could all happen this week. We expect at least the House and the Senate, and the governor has indicated that he's likely to sign this bill. The other 2 bills that are in play are H422, which is a bill to temporarily remove firearms from a home where somebody's been accused of domestic violence or abuse for a short period of time. The House passed that out last year. It's been sitting in Senate Judiciary since last year, but they are now taking it up. So that's going to be happening as well. And then the third bill is S-221, which is regarding extreme risk protection orders. And that is in House Judiciary right now. So each of those has been in the other body. They always have to go through both bodies and then get passed by the governor. So we expect that those two bills will come out very soon also. So what you can do is you can let your legislators know how you feel about those bills. You can call the Sergeant at Arms office. You can also call the governor's office and let them know how you feel about it. I can get the numbers and read them to you if you want, but that's the general idea. Did I miss anything, anybody? Good, okay, thanks.
Any other legislators wish to comment? If not, we can continue questions. Oh, Harvey? I'm sorry, Harvey, you must have just come in.
Good morning. I'm Harvey Smith. I represent the towns of New Haven, Weybridge, and Bridport, and I serve on the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee.
Okay. Back to questions, comments. Move to the microphone and go right ahead. Yes.
Good morning. Good morning. First, I'd like to thank all of their legislatures for their service to our community. My name is Patricia Reed, and I'm a resident of Addison. I've come today to ask your opinion on S53 and H248, the two bills currently before Vermont's legislature in support of universal primary care. Due to Vermont's patchwork healthcare legislation, I'm one of the state's uninsured residents. This year, I made a choice. I decided against working fewer hours, qualifying for Medicaid, and treating my known medical conditions. I know many people who are forced to choose the opposite. So instead of talking about me, I'd like to take a moment to share the story of one of my dear friends who recently celebrated 3 years of sobriety from opioid addiction that certainly would have taken her life. Unlike me, my friend can't choose to give up her access to Medicaid. Without Green Mountain Care, she wouldn't have access to the Suboxone, other medications, and counseling she needs to stay healthy. Without insurance, these medications would cost well over $1,000 per month, a burden my friend cannot even imagine shouldering herself. This woman is a light in our community. She is a kind, generous, and joyful soul, and she's also educated, hardworking, and dedicated. After beginning the opioid rehabilitation program that she continues to faithfully participate in today, my friend found a job that would allow her to work just enough to keep her earnings under the Medicaid requirement. Late last year, that business could no longer organize the logistics of her reduced role. Today, she's unemployed. My friend can't find a job in her field that would either pay her under the Medicaid limit or one with benefits that would provide the care she needs. Instead, she's home and she's not contributing to our economy. Much as my friend wants to work and much as she is capable of success, she cannot oust herself from poverty because she's dependent on Vermont's patchwork healthcare legislation. UPC would improve my quality of life and it would improve that of my dear friends. I believe healthcare is a human right, not a privilege, and that S53 and H248 would be one of many steps toward creating a single-payer healthcare system that has proven effective in so many other developed nations. Still, I also recognize that I don't know what I don't know. It's clear to me that our legislatures have a much deeper view into how healthcare works than I do, so I'm here this morning to ask for your insight. I'm hopeful that you can provide some clarification and explanation about this complicated issue. Thank you.
Any legislator wish to comment or answer? Peter?
The expert, of course, is Senator Claire Ayer, who has sponsored the universal primary care bill and has attempted to shepherd it through the Senate. The last that I knew about it was that it was basically going nowhere, largely due to the fact that if you think back to when we studied full universal health care for Vermont, tens of millions of dollars were attached to it, a full staff of people to investigate it, a major undertaking. But at this point, universal primary care has a few citizen legislators and no budget to study. And without having money available to really study it in depth, as I understand it, it is sort of sitting, probably going to be in a study committee over the summer. Is that about accurate?
Yes.
Good morning, Paul Forlenza. Thank you for the legislators who have advanced the 3 pieces of legislation on guns. There are a couple of provisions that were put in and then quickly taken out, and I wonder if there's any appetite in the legislature to pursue those either this session or next. And those three things are the sale and manufacture of assault weapons, which Massachusetts and New York has. The second is the 10-day waiting period. And the third is locked storage.
Thanks for those questions, Paul. So yes, you probably all read about Representative Martin Malone from South Burlington put those in. He sits on House Judiciary, and he put those in for purposes of starting a conversation. And as with a lot of legislation, it takes a while to get it right, and it's important to get it right. And so they were there to start a conversation to make sure they don't get forgotten. I don't know that anybody actually expected they would go through, even though there was a lot of hope that they might. But for example, with the limits to assault weapons, some states have done it well and some states have not. Connecticut was so specific that every year the gun manufacturers could make a little change and then it wouldn't qualify and they'd have to make more changes. So I think my understanding is that that committee wants to really look at it to be sure that they can do it right. It's also my understanding that there's going to be some sort of a governor's commission to study gun violence prevention, and there's a list being made of what's happening, what topics are that we want to take up. So my guess is that this will be taken up probably next year, but not this year. And while I'm here, I want to mention one more piece of safety that is being done, and it's in my committee. The institutions part of my committee is all the bonded dollars, all the money that the state borrows to do things. And the governor asked us to put several $1 million in for school safety upgrades. And so at the moment, there's $4 million in there for school safety upgrades, and there's assessments being done across the state about what the needs are. So we're also tackling it from that end, and that bill's up this week. Hopefully that'll pass.
I see a long line here, and I want to get out of the way so they can all say their piece. But I need to speak on healthcare. I think S53 has been sabotaged by the Senate leadership. Senator Claire Ayer put S53 together, which was a detailed structure for a plan to have concrete plans coming out of the Green Mountain Care Board, the Judiciary Committee, etc., to actually define what that would be. So when it come up at a future date, there would be well-known data and plans on how to implement that. That got into Senator Kitchell's Appropriation Committee, in which Senator Ash is on, and that bill was gutted. So what was passed out of the Senate Appropriation Committee and out of the Senate is strictly a very much weaker bill to ask the Green Mountain Care Board to study it, and a weak statement that says that the Green Mountain Care Board would have the resources to do it. Now, if you understand that Governor Scott's budget has actually cut the Green Mountain Care Board's budget. This is a very bad thing to do, not only for S53, but we have One Care coming on, which is important and probably a good thing, but it needs to be watched very closely. So the Green Mountain Care Board actually needs more staff to look at the facts and figures about One Care. And that's all I want to say, and then I will let all these young people talk. Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Greta Hardy-Mattel, and I'm a student at MUHS.
And Andy Bowe, I'm a senior at MUHS.
I'm Kathy Dyer. I'm an 8th grader at MUMS.
I'm Zora Duquette-Hoffman. I am an 8th grader at Middlebury Union Middle School.
I'm Anya Hardy-Mattel. I'm also an 8th grader at MUMS.
And we just wanted to speak this morning
we wanted to speak this morning to remind the crowd here and the legislators that the walkout at MUMS and MUHS occurred in support of the same protests that happened this Saturday, and to remind the legislators that their gun legislation has our full support as students and to urge them to pass it through as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so we held a walkout the Wednesday the 14th in a snowstorm, and we got a lot of people in town with both the middle school, the high school, and the college. And then we did another one at the high school last Monday when school was in session, which was much more of a vigil for the Parkland victims. And it has a lot of support from the students and from the teachers at the school.
And the three of us and 7 other girls who go to MUMS, we went and we talked to the governor a few weeks ago about this, and we talked to some of the legislators too. And so we would just like to remind everybody that these bills have our support, and anything to make schools safer from guns, we are supportive of.
We know that our legislators have been hearing a lot from gun lobbyists, but we'd like you guys to know that we are in full support of what they're doing right now.
We'd also like to thank all the legislators for any changes they have already made towards supporting gun violence prevention laws.
All right, thank you very much.
Spence Putnam from Weybridge, and I think many of us applaud the activity that we're seeing on the part of young people on this and other issues. And most people I've mentioned this to seem to be aware, but I'd just like to remind the students that if you're 17 years old, you can register now to vote, as long as you're going to be 18 on the date of the general election in November. And you can't vote in local elections, but you can vote in the primary and in the November election. So I urge, well, actually everybody here, if you're not registered, please do register so that you can make your vote count in November.
Thanks, Spence. Chief?
Chief Merkel, Virginia's Police Department. I guess I probably don't need this, but I'm going to speak into the mic anyhow. I hear you. You can't hear me? I ate my Wheaties this morning, sir. I'm sorry. I commend the group that was here today from the school for standing up for something you feel so important about. One of the great things about the United States and the state of Vermont is you can and will be heard if you're persistent enough, and God bless you. Being the chief of police of Virginia's, my job is to keep the kids in my school safe. I've been in law enforcement now almost 26 years, and it's unconscionable for me to even think that our schools may not be safe. There's a lot of conversation going on in Vermont and across the country about what we should do. While I support a lot of the ideas that are going on, that are being thrown out there, one of the things I have a real concern about is what are we really doing with mental health. The mental health issue is a key component, and we're kind of talking about it as far as dangerous people, and I don't like to necessarily refer to people with mental health issues necessarily as dangerous, but there's a hole there. People that have mental health issues that pose a significant threat to themselves or others should not have access to firearms. And there's a hole between gun registration and mental health issues. That has got to be closed, because let's face it, anybody that even considers going into a school and using a firearm against innocent children, or anybody for that matter of fact, has got a mental health issue. And I want to know what our legislators are doing about that. Not only that, law enforcement every day now, if you read the paper, law enforcement every day is being charged with dealing with mental health issues on the street. While we're kind of the shell answer men and we do everything, it's very, very difficult for us to be able to deal with some mental health issues. It puts us in a bad position. It puts the person who's experienced that condition in a bad position. And by the grace of God, we've got some good police officers in this county and throughout the state. We usually have a good response and a good finish to it. But my question is, what else are we doing to resolve the mental health issue in the state? The system is broken. And I'd like to have a legislator explain that.
Diane?
Thank you, Chief. We've had conversations around some of the severe issues of not having space for people who are experiencing some mental issues, for the police to be able to take them to that's in a place of care. If Porter Hospital is here, I'm sure that they could indicate some of the issues with the emergency room and around the issues around mental health processing and being able to have the staff and the space to be able to do that. So I can answer you in this way around some of the things, and I'm sure others will fill in where I've got a gap of what we have been trying to take on in the legislature to see what we can do, also staying within the financial constraints that we're in and being able to address some of this issue. Whether it's in the Capitol bill around planning, and I think some of the other members here can talk about some of the long-term planning for space and the plan around building out some new bed facilities. But you recently also heard that Vermont received a benefit of about $28 million one-time money from a lawsuit litigation around the tobacco company. But we can talk about why that's there and where it came from, but the truth is, what did we do with it? So with one-time money, working with the governor and others, 14 million of that, half of that one-time money is going to go out into the communities right now in a way that's going to be used to deal with substance use and mental health issues. And how can we shore up the system, not just for 1 year, but maybe over a 4-year period to get something started. So there's a working group, there's some initial investments put in, and then there's going to be a working group that's put together to figure out how to spend the rest of that money that's a wise investment. So I can say that we have some significant funds to help to deal with that. Other things around the mental health issues, I find that the support of the universal background checks is helpful in that area if we can stick to it. And also a few years ago, not this year, but in the past, we've already passed legislation that has said that if you are an imminent threat to yourself and others, and must go through adjudication process. This isn't easy to be determined that you should not be able to purchase a gun. And people's rights then also have the ability to appeal that. So trying to address the issue that the chief has brought up, and I see my light is on. So let Robin speak to the next bit.
So I can speak to 5 things that are in 2 budgets that we're doing specifically. In the appropriations budget, there is money in the general fund to increase the number of community outreach counselors to assist people seeking emergency services in communities. We also are providing additional funds to make what's called the Peer Warm Line available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this assists people who are in need of help and has shown a significant ability to divert people from emergency services and should be able to reduce demands on emergency rooms. Third, in the general fund budget, I don't know whether this is a pilot, but they've specifically directed funding for additional housing and associated supported services in the Rutland area, where there's been a very identified area of shortages, and we're hoping that that will make a difference. And then in my budget, the capital budget in institutions, we're proposing to provide 3 beds in the Chittenden Women's Facility, excuse me, and 10 beds in one of the men's facilities for inmates who need a therapeutic setting but don't need a hospital level of care. So that again keeps folks out of ERs and other things. And then also we're providing $2.5 million to Buildings and General Services to purchase land or a building to replace the secure residential facility located in Middlesex. This was a temporary facility. It's a step down from a level 1. The psychiatric hospital in Berlin is a level 1 acuity. This is a step down from that, but is still a hospital level of care. And the intent is to have between 8 and 16 beds over the long term. Construction takes a while, so that we're putting the money in to get that ball rolling. So those are some things that we're also doing.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank the students as well. I visited, I don't know if any of you were up at the State House, but I have visited with some of them. But in the meantime, I've spent quite a lot of time trying to understand the issues surrounding this, especially the mental health issues. So I went down to the council service and met with several of the individuals down there to try to understand where we are, and they'll say the gun issue isn't necessarily a mental health issue, but as George pointed out, or the Chief Merkel pointed out, it is a mental health issue, but where do you draw that line for, you know, who is receiving care and who needs to be reported for being a threat to themselves or others? And that's a real challenge for us. In the universal background check that we have, there is a line on the form that asks if you've had any mental health issues that would restrict you from owning a gun. If you go into the fine print and find out what that means, it basically says that unless you've been committed or adjudicated, that you can check no on that box. So we're missing, you know, a number of people that are there, and it puts our law enforcement people in a very difficult position because they're out on the ground, they're talking, and they know the constituency that they serve, and yet their hands are kind of tied as to what they can do for enforcement actions under certain conditions. And I'm sure that Chief Merkel would speak more to that if needed. But there's some real challenges out there, and we need to find some answers. I'm glad to see that, you know, in the legislature we're making improvements. Those are a lot of things that I talked about, the council and service and their needs and what they need. But as far as defining somebody's mental health, it's dependent on where you draw the line and who draws the line and what are the consequences for drawing that line. And that's a tough issue. It's an issue that, you know, our medical profession is dealing with, the law enforcement people are dealing with, but it's not an easy thing to overcome. You can be perfectly sane one moment and have some mental illness another moment. So it's a difficult issue.
I'll just add one thing quickly, and that is, you know, when Diane mentioned the financial constraints we're working under, that means that we have a governor who has said no new taxes, no new fees, who has told school districts that even though their budget levels came in about half of what he asked for, he said that that's not enough. There are really two services that have no choice but to deal with the mental health crisis that we have in Vermont. That's the police, who have to answer every call, and the education system, where they have to serve whatever students are dropped off each morning. When they have significant needs, they go to the mental health services. The mental health services are under their own financial strain. But one thing that they have the ability to do is say, no, we don't have the money or the resources to serve those needs. Our budget is gone. The police and the schools don't have that option. Yet we're living in an era where we have been told no new taxes, no new fees, and school budgets need to stay at a certain level. And for obvious reasons, it's taxes, but we do have a mental health situation in Vermont that is unlike anything that we've faced before. A lot of it has to do with the opioid epidemic, and the solutions aren't easy and they aren't cheap.
I have to go to work. I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt this important debate, but I have an unrelated question having to do with opioids. I'm Elizabeth Ottinger in Middlebury. I'm here on behalf of a friend who's of 10 years standing, whose husband is a Vietnam vet. He's too sick to make it to the VA. And the unintended consequences of the war against opioids is that his doctor cannot give him pain medication. She broke down in tears and sobbed on my shoulder for half an hour. And she said, is there nothing that can be done so my doctor won't be afraid to prescribe for him? And all I'm saying is, I support the war against opioids. I see the effects every day. But this situation, I think, has gotten a little out of control. I'm hoping something could be done to protect doctors acting in good faith. Thank you.
Chief? Tim, one more piece, just to kind of clarify what I'm talking about with the mental health issue. I'm sure you're all familiar with what happened down in Fairhaven, what nearly happened at Fairhaven Union High School. And I have a vested interest in that high school. I came from there. I lived in that area and attended that school. So when I heard about this, of course, school safety has always piqued my interest. That young man was exhibiting mental health issues for quite a long time. He was actually removed from school because of his condition, because of the threat that he posed to the school staff. He was sent to a school in Maine and then he came back. Within 1 week, there were 30 some odd kids that refused to go to that school because he was back in town. This kid had the opportunity to go into Dick's Sports in Rutland and purchase a firearm, a shotgun with buckshot. Anybody knows anything about guns knows that can be as lethal a weapon as an AR-15 or anything else. But yet, this kid who was having these issues was able to go into a store, purchase firearm, and purchase ammunition. And there was no stop. There was no checks and balances there. So that's the point I'm making. When somebody is having, that's a sticky issue. That's a real tough issue. Where do you draw the line? Where do you respect people's rights versus where do you protect our community? But to me, I'd rather protect our community. And that is unacceptable for that kind of thing to happen. And if you don't think it can happen again, it can. And I'm taking every step I can to get a school resource officer in my school. Because if you follow what happened in Maryland, the person that stopped the perpetrator was the school resource officer. There's no guarantee with that either. But we've got to take a serious stand on protecting our children in school. That is the last place our kids need to worry about being safe.
Thank you, Chief. I really glad that you're in Virgins and have a strong hold on things. But I want to also bring up to the subject, because this is often, there's a lot of things that get mixed up in this. Mental health does not equate to violence. There are people who are just plain violent, and we have a gun violence issue. We also have a mental health issue. But people who have mental health issues are not all violent. And people who are all violent or are violent are not all having mental health issues. But there are some people who are violent and having mental health issues. So we have to be careful not to just conflate those two things all the time, that there are very specific people with violent issues that need our help and protection from, and our issues around mental health. So I just want to make sure that we can keep those conversations up front, but also not all mixed up. Thanks.
Margaret Cloak, Middlebury. I just want to have a little conversation about AR-15s. I have a deep respect for hunters. At one point in my life, well, many years ago, deer kept me in food for the winter in my family. So I'm not anti-hunter at all. I respect them. I hope that hunters don't feel tied to the AR-15 issue, because that really has nothing to do with hunters. Hunters don't use AR-15s. AR-15s are military weapons, not meant to be in citizens' hands, and I hope we can address that at some point. These tying weapons give good hunters a bad reputation that they certainly don't deserve. You can't roll them all in together. And I feel bad I know hunters have been with their orange jackets and everything at the State House, and I wish we could explain to them that we're trying to save their reputation. They shouldn't get a bad rap for this, because what they do is nothing to do with weapons like the AR-15. Thank you.
Comments? More comments? The same issue, or if you'd like to change issues, that's fine too. Natalie.
I have to sneak one little thing in here. Natalie Peters, Middlebury. Robin gave us a list of numbers of beds and slots that are being made available for these people. My question is, what was the need? What percentage are these beds going to cover? 10%? 50 or 100?
Is there a good answer for that? The percentage that those 10 or 15 beds would cover?
So, thanks for asking the question. We actually spent quite a lot of time and took quite a lot of testimony on what we really need. We are budgeting to try to meet as close to 100% of the need as we can, it turns out.
But how close is it?
Well, we never know what 100% of the need is because it can change on a daily basis. But the testimony we took from the Department of Mental Health and the Agency of Human Services and everybody else said some of it depends on what happens with Medicare and what happens at the state hospital. It's such an integrated system. The intent is to cover 100% of what we need. Whether we will do that, I can't promise you that will be the truth of what happens, but that is the intent.
That doesn't really answer it.
I can't give you a better answer than that.
Okay. More questions or change of subject if you'd like?
Hi, I'm Linda Digg. I'm from Starksboro. I'd like to hear either from the police chief or the police chief and Robin. There are other issues besides the guns that could help, besides restricting the guns, that would help with school safety, such as metal detectors. And I want to know other ways that you are up at the legislature and with the governor, other ways that they're protecting the kids in schools and how they're making schools safer.
Chief?
Yes, ma'am. There's many things we can do, some of which don't cost any money. I mean, if you look at, I deal with kids all the time. One of the nice things about Virgins, and a lot of police chiefs and police officers around the state have the opportunity to walk into the school and interact with kids. And to me, that's the best part of my day. When I get to go into Virginia Union High School and I get the fist bumps or somebody picks on me about being a New York Yankees fan, my day is good. And believe that's why I wear this vest. But at any rate, spending time with kids, spending time with your children, paying attention to what kids are going through, dealing with issues of bullying, making sure kids aren't disfranchised, that they don't feel like they're separate from the rest of the school community. Talking to kids is, I mean, how do you quantify that? It's tough, but I'll tell you, I do it every week when I go into the Virginia Union High School, middle school. Kids just want to be recognized. They want to feel like they have some worth and somebody hears them. Get them involved in sports. These are all things they can do that we should do and we try to do. And we have to look for those kids that don't have those opportunities. And I was a football coach this year for the first time for Jen's Mount Aid. And I got to connect with kids that were having difficulties at the time. And one of the underlying reasons that we're having problems with kids in school and outside of school is because of substance abuse and the dissolution of the family unit. There's kids out there. There was one young gentleman that didn't even know where he was going to be sleeping from night to night. And to me, that's unconscionable. And we got involved, and we found them a place to sleep, and we made sure they had food, and they had an apartment. But this is one of the things we can do. The technology is something we need to look into. I don't like to think our schools have to be Fort Knox, but having doors that lock, restricting access to the schools, making sure that people pay attention to them, and that the school staff adheres to it, those are all things we can do, but again, they cost money, and that technology is expensive. But one of the things I like about the school resource officer, and if I wasn't a police chief, that's what I'd be doing, is it gives me the opportunity to go in to talk to kids, go in to teach classes, to identify kids at risk and spend my time with them. Time with kids equates to good things. Kids just want to have somebody that cares about them. That's a simple process, and we can all do that. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I'll tell you something. My time does not cost me anything.
I still would like to hear about the metal detectors.
And metal detectors will work.
And the cost, is the cost the restriction?
The cost is a restriction, but one thing you got to think about, ma'am, I know my red light probably went off, but one of the things you've got to understand, you can have technology, you can have if you see something, say something, you can talk about all these things, but at the end of the day, ma'am, if I'm committed to get into a school to do harm to people, I'm going to get in there. The school resource officer is the piece that will finally stop that threat, and that's what we've got to do. That's my opinion.
Okay, so then that leaves it up to the governor, I would think, making the suggestion that we look at the cost of those things and that be something talked about. I've not heard that talked about as much as the gun restrictions.
I believe he's doing that.
Good.
So let me try to speak to that, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, but maybe our superintendent, Burrows, may have some things to be specific, because I'm not in his school, or in his system. We have put in the capital budget $4 million to upgrade school safety and security, to be matched by another $1 million from Homeland Security, with some small match from each of the schools. So we're talking $5 million off the top. If it's matched, that's $10 million across schools. Right now, there are assessments being done by the Department of Public Safety and other organizations that I'm going to forget, to look at all the schools and see what we have. And the money is specifically going to go for things like video surveillance, locks on doors. I mean, there's a lot of things. Some schools are in great shape, and some schools really don't have a lot. So it depends on where you are and what your school's been able to afford. So, bulletproof windows, locks on doors, stronger doors, lines of sight, video surveillance. I'm sure there are other things, but that's what the money is intended to go for, to improve the safety in our schools directly. And I really think I ought to turn it over to Peter for more specifics on that.
I was just going to jump in here for just 1 minute, Peter. I know that you're going to go next, but I just wanted to make sure that it's the children who have come to us. They're saying they are not the problem. They are the solution, and they are asking for our help in this protection. And that there were 2 fire drills this past week in Vermont that the children refused to leave because they were afraid to go outside. The guns don't necessarily have to come in to kill you. As we've seen, they'll get if they can get the kids to come out, or in any situation. So there are hardening of the building and things that we can do, but we have to remember that the violence issue is much bigger than just an entry point into the building.
Good morning. So this is, as everyone knows, a really highly complex issue, and right now, throughout the state of Vermont, throughout the country, all school districts are really taking time to look at what can we do to make our schools safer. And one of the things that I think the community asks, we want to be sure, we want to guarantee that our kids are going to be safe, and all of us want to give that guarantee, but we know we can't. As Chief Merkel just mentioned, there are many, many things we can put in place, but we can't create a fortress that's going to be impregnable. It's just not, it's not what we can do. What we can do, I think on a number of fronts, and I think the students are a great example of one of the things we can do, is we can be really vocal and allow students to be a voice in making change. And I think this has been happening, these school shootings have been happening more and more frequently, to the point where we're becoming desensitized. And students leading the way, I think, one, is really critical. In terms of what our school districts are doing right now to make them safer, in talking with every superintendent across the state, everybody is looking at their buildings. So there's obviously the physical perimeter, and there's always more that we can do. Schools do get safety audits from state agencies frequently, so this is something that we're not just starting right now, we're in continual improvement with our buildings. When something of the magnitude of Parkland happens, it causes all of us to stop and really take a look and see what will work. An example, metal detectors, there's conflicted research on whether those are effective or not in deterring school violence. Again, all of the different things that we can do, we need to do thoughtfully, and we need to make sure that we're also creating a culture in our schools of learning, which is another critical piece. There was John wrote a piece on arming educators recently in the Addison Independent, I think last week. And I think in his conversation with educators throughout Addison County, there was not a lot of support for arming educators due to all of the collateral issues that would be caused by that. So the other thing that we can do is training and training students. And one of the shifts in school safety over the last 10 years or so has been a shift from lockdown, where staff and students would lock down in a specific classroom, to a kind of run, hide, fight model of training, where students are really trained to respond differently in a severe situation like we had at Parkland. School resource officers are helpful as well. We have a school resource officer here. It sounds like Virgins is working on that as well, which is great. So we're doing a lot. I think it's really important for us to continue with the momentum that we have right now, to continue to push. There is a lot that can happen with the legislature in terms of making thoughtful gun control and school safety legislation. There's work that school districts are doing and will continue to do. We are led by the Agency of Education. I've got a red light there. Do you want me to slow down? Stop? Wrap up? Okay. Anyway, the Agency of Education is also unifies all of the school districts, so we're not doing these things on our own. We are led by the agency, which helps us in terms of training and making changes to buildings and practices. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Terry.
One thing the Rutland Caucus talked about was whether schools were 9/11 compliant, and they discovered when they did it in Pittsburgh to try to find out, the rescue went to the superintendent's office instead of the school. So it's, I believe, from what I've read, the schools in Vermont are only about 42% compliant right now, so that's certainly something they need to be tested for. And also, possibly each classroom should have a landline phone, because even though here we're probably fine with cell, lots of places in Vermont have no cell service, especially inside of a school. And another thing that I think we need to really work at is why these kids, they're high school kids, are feeling so angry that they feel they need to go in and shoot their fellow students. There's obviously a reason for that. I don't recall hearing any 30-year-olds going into schools doing the same thing, so it's something that's going on with these kids. Possibly, I'm going to say video games, because my son plays them. He's fine, but I think if they had any issues at all, possibly, you know, if you're 11, 12 years old, and in order to win the game, you've got to kill everybody on the island, that's just not acceptable to me. My son went to St. Mary's School. I realized it's a small elementary school, but they only had they have 4 doors. One opens from the outside, and you had to announce who you were. The secretary could look right out the door to see you, and she wouldn't buzz you in until she knew who you were. It's certainly a possibility. It keeps the riffraff out. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Next comment. Go ahead.
I'm Bob Burton. I live in Cornwall. When I was 17, I signed up for a 12-year hitch with the United States Navy and was a combat pilot. And I took the GI Bill after that and went back to graduate school and practiced medicine for 30 years. And I don't think we're dealing with a Corps. I followed Chief Merkel for 5 to 10 years now, never heard him be wrong, but the legislature doesn't agree. What I'm seeing after this last thing with Colorado coming in, marijuana is a major problem. We talk about tobacco being terrible. Marijuana does exactly what tobacco does, but a lot more. The violence and insanity that comes out that we're seeing today can be traced right back to marijuana. I have done a little bit of research. I don't have CDC capabilities, but I haven't found a school shooter yet who wasn't on marijuana. And we have seen the research on that it causes violence. I disagree with Diane on violence. Anybody who has violence, there's a mental health issue. If you know anything about PTSD, People who fought in wars have a problem with PTSD because they're forced to do violent things. And that violence, they try to suppress it, but it's a problem. So we're seeing an issue here. We have 3 provinces north of us, Quebec, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, 0 tolerance for marijuana. We need that in Vermont. Marijuana also leads to the opioid epidemic. For the kids in school, we all went to school. We never had your problem. Teachers, when I was in school, were not armed. And the kids all brought their guns to school. We never had a shooting because the teachers would stack them in the corner and the kids would go home and hunt afterwards. So that guns aren't the issue, but protection and safety is. And we're
having a problem with safety with some of the legislation coming out of Montpelier.
Thank you.
Good morning, Andrew Pizzullo from Middlebury. I have to participate in these drills several times a year. You know, the gun safety drill and the fire drills and things like that. I work in a school, and I should probably just go quack, quack, because I'm just a sitting duck. Come on. You tell me, hide behind that sheetrock wall there. You know what most of these walls, there's like a ½ inch of drywall on either side. Get behind that wall and hide and be quiet. They'll never figure out that a school that was full of students one moment is now empty of students. Okay, so what kind of ridiculous situation is that? Every time I have to do one of those drills, I know I am not safe. And you cannot afford to make me safe. Are you going to make bulletproof walls? Are you going to replace all the windows with bulletproof glass? No, you're not. You can barely stand to invest in our children now. All right, and you think you're going to build a fortress to protect me? You got to get those guns off the street. That's it. Okay, that's the only protection that I need. So please, I don't want to be quacking like a duck for the rest of my life.
Hi, I'm Abby from Lincoln, and with all due respect, sir, you are 100% wrong about marijuana. As a person who's smoked it many times in my life, I can tell you I've never once had any inclination towards violence whatsoever. Knowing many people who have had it many times in my life, never ever have they been violent. The people who I know who have gotten violent are the people who are drinking alcohol. I've never ever tried opioids and never been inclined to be. I have a mother who is in severe pain all the time and can find no other relief for her pain, including no access to opioids because of recent legislation, and marijuana is the only thing that can help her. You are 100% wrong. And as a person who has depression and anxiety and must take medicine every day to function, I can tell you right now, I have never had any inclination to go into a school and shoot it up, nor has my sister who's bipolar, my 5 aunts who are on medicine, and my several cousins who are also on medicine for depression. I am absolutely an example, and you do not have the facts, sir. It has been shown that marijuana has led to opioid reduction. People are using it to reduce pain instead of opioids, and it is a way for people to come off that medicine. So I just want everybody in this room to know that I am an example. I know many people who are an example, and you are 100% wrong.
Okay.
It is not an indicator of violence.
I'm sure that there are 2 sides to the issue, and if you're going to hang around a little bit afterward, ma'am, I would love to have people have the ability to speak to you one-on-one. Yes.
Margaret Cloak, Middlebury. Just one comment after listening to the chief here. His interaction with the kids in the school not only feel like they're heard, but it's also a wonderful way to get to understand or meet somebody that might have a problem, and you can talk to that person and find out if they are in a position to do some harm to themselves or other people just by talking to them. And I think that feeding out, how am I going to say this, pulling that other person's feelings out is just as important as talking to the kids that are in good shape.
Thank you. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Jim Daig from Granville, Vermont. Excuse me.
And Peter, I wonder if you would update us on the progress of H911?
I'd be happy to, but I'd actually ask Fred Baser, who's on the Ways and Means Committee, which is a Ways and Means Committee bill, and he can talk a little bit better about it.
Okay, H911, Fred.
Exciting subject. H911 is about taxes. All of you that file a tax return will find that there is a major change in how it's going to impact your Vermont state income tax. 911 also included a measure that changed the way, a little bit anyway, that we're going to raise money for public education. I came prepared with some handouts that I'll leave by the door that you can take on your way out that might give you the details and how this works, rather than me going through it blow by blow today. I'll cover a couple of the high spots. Concerning our Vermont state taxes, I think a good bit of news for anyone over 62 or who people that are on Social Security is that we finally have put a provision in where people that make, if you file individually, up to 45 grand a year, your Social Security tax will not be taxed. We've been taxing Social Security like any other income, and we've put a provision in where if you make up to 45 and you're single, you won't be taxed on Social Security. If you make up to 60 and you file jointly, you won't be taxed on your Social Security. And then there's a $10,000 buffer, 45 to 55, 60 to 70, where you won't pay taxes, but it'll be on a graduated basis. I thought that was a great measure that we included. I also liked in the tax bill the fact that we increased the earned income tax credit, which I think is perhaps the best thing we can do to help deal with income inequality, where people that are working actually get an additional credit if their income is low enough that puts money in their pocket. And we've increased the amount that Vermonters will get in that program. Looking to education, there is a brand new income tax surcharge that will raise almost 60 million bucks. And that surcharge will also have the effect of reducing people's homestead property tax. Not the total property tax bill, but that portion of it which goes to education. The effort was to perhaps put some control in our property tax situation, which is the #1 complaint I hear when I knock on doors from people in the past. So people will see a little bit of an increase in their income tax, and correspondingly will see a decrease in their property tax. Whether you come out ahead in that process will probably depend on your property tax amount and the value of your home and what you make. Some people I think will benefit well, others may get nicked a little bit, but it was an effort on our part to perhaps change things, and I think there'll be more discussions along this line in the future. So that's a real quick piece on 9/11. It passed in the House, it'll be going to the Senate, and we never know what the Senate's going to do. I might suspect they'll tweak things and there'll be a conference committee that will eventually work things out, but there's going to be major changes to your tax bills and how they're computed. You might be interested in that, and you might be interested in picking up a handout. I don't think I have enough for everybody, but for most of you, there should be a handout at the front door.
So we changed the topic a bit, and that's fine. Any other questions? Yes.
Good morning. I'm new to Vermont, and I live in Middlebury. My name is Rick Sicagrana. I find Vermont to be a very curious place for any number of different reasons. One of them, for example, I have to add to my list is having a police chief who's a Yankees fan. But he seems to have a good heart, so I guess I can understand that. I'm not a gun owner. Don't have a gun, don't have an inclination to. I get a feeling in Vermont I may be expected to, but can somebody define for me what an assault weapon is? I keep hearing this term thrown around. Not sure I understand what it means. And secondly, although I think marijuana for medicinal purposes is fine, I don't understand how people who are concerned about mental health issues can introduce marijuana into the general commerce of the state by allowing anybody with a piece of land or a pot to grow and use marijuana. So, thank you.
So, can I get the chief to answer the first question?
Let me just jump in first and say that was one of the issues as to why you have not seen an assault weapons ban legislation yet. The Judiciary Committee took this up, and what they discovered is that, in fact, defining what is an assault weapon is a very piece of tricky business. There is no federal definition. The other states have monkeyed around with definitions, and it's been a little bit problematic. But maybe the chief has a better answer.
Okay.
I don't know if I've got a better answer, Pete, or not, but basically, an assault weapon, people identify that with the AR-15, which is something that came out back after the Korean War, and it's a weapon. It's a .223 round, and it's a lethal weapon. It is. A .223 round can also be used. The .223 can be used for a varmint rifle. People go out and kill varmints with woodchucks and such as that. The difference between a .223 rifle and an assault weapon is an assault weapon is a semi-automatic weapon. As fast as you pull the trigger, the round will come out of the barrel. A rifle is a single shot. Now, one thing I will tell you, I know this is a very highly charged issue. A .223 or an assault rifle can either have a 10-round, 15-round, or 30-round magazine. That means as fast as you pull the trigger, the round comes out of it. A semi-automatic shotgun, which will hold 6 to 8 rounds, is equally as lethal, and depending on the type of ammunition you have in that, like buckshot, and again, it actually makes me feel a little uneasy talking about when I think about the intended victims, both pose a significant threat. So when you start talking about the lethality of weapons and you're talking about the type of weapon, you've got to look at not the weapon, you've got to look at the people that are using the weapon. And again, there's arguments, pro and con for assault rifles. I'm not going to get into that. I don't have a vest thick enough to protect me on that one. But the fact of the matter is, it's the person that's handling the weapon. It's not necessarily a weapon, it's the ammunition that they're putting in that weapon. And it's something that, unfortunately, we have to discuss wisely, not knee-jerk reaction, because it's out there, folks. It's caught up with Vermont, and we've got to protect ourselves. Now, on the marijuana issue, young lady, I'm a police officer. You probably know my stand against marijuana. But the fact of the matter is, if it's used for medicinal purposes, I don't have a problem with it. I don't. If people choose to use that for recreational, my personal feeling is I'm against that. But when you talk about the medicinal piece, it's not the fact that people use it to help their ailments. If my mom was sick with a serious illness, something that was debilitating, and smoking marijuana or using marijuana helped her, I'd be okay with that because I don't want to see anybody suffer. But it's just like alcohol. If it's used inappropriately, it poses a threat. I have seen the carnage of what both have done on our highways. And it's something that nobody should have to deal with. Just like when this gentleman served the service, as if he was ever in combat, nobody should see the carnage on our streets that go on. I went to that fatality on 22A. I've been doing this 26 years. That hit me harder than anything I've ever been to, because there was 4 young people that were not going home. Was marijuana the cause of that? I can't say that. But when I see a substance in a person's system and their accident or injury results, I've got a problem with that. So alcohol, just like pot, when you use it inappropriately, it causes problems. And when kids are exposed to it, kids don't know enough to make good, sound decisions in a lot of cases. I've got a problem with that. I do not want to be the one going to somebody's house and telling their parents they weren't going home. But to correlate the use of pot with violence, sir, I'm sorry, you're a Red Sox fan, so I will disagree with you. That doesn't necessarily equate. It's just like alcohol. I can drink a beer and I don't get violent. If I drink too much beer or too much, well, I fall asleep. But some people can't handle that. So you've got to look at it that way. You've got to have that intelligent. You can't broad brush everything because of the type of substance you're using. So I got the red light. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. or comment? Yes.
Okay, minimum wage, where's the minimum wage legislation stand? Haven't heard any much about it lately. I know you have to help me out. My son comes in from Massachusetts, and he almost mockingly points out how low the pay is in his industry. He doesn't pay taxes in Vermont. He was born and raised here. I want to thank you for the great job Middlebury did in educating him. He's able to make a decent income elsewhere. All right, and we would like to bring some young people back. So please, where is the minimum wage legislation?
Anybody want to give a quick answer to where it is?
This is a very quick answer. It is in House General Housing and Military Affairs, and I believe they're going to start taking that up maybe this week. I would check the calendar on the Vermont General Assembly website. Passed out of the Senate, and that's the committee it's in the House.
Thank you very much. Well, we've run out of time, and I know we're pretty much a single issue today, which is kind of unusual for this forum, but I want to thank you all for coming. It was very important that you're here. Your legislators will hang around for a little while after the meeting, and you can speak with them there. The program each Monday through the legislative session is brought to you by the Bridport Grange and the Addison County Farm Bureau. In order to help us, there's a little plastic jug as you leave, and if you put $1 in there, we would be most appreciative. It's a donation only, and it helps us continue these throughout the legislative session. Next week, we'll be at the Congregational Church on Maple Street in Salisbury, and we hope to see you there next week at 7 a.m. Thank you.